Good day, everyone. I'll be reporting the authors of the European literature. Specifically, I'll be mentioning two authors of the Italian and other two authors of the French literature. I am Rona Jane Romarate and I will be your reporter. To start with, let's first talk about Dante Alighieri. Dante Alighieri, or often referred to simply as Dante, was born in the year 1265 in Florence, Italy, and died in the year 1321. Dante was an Italian poet, writer, and philosopher, and he is the most famous Italian writer in his time. And he is also described as the father of the Italian language, and in Italy, he is often referred to as the supreme poet. Dante is also known for establishing the use of the vernacular in literature at a time when most poetry was written in Latin, which was accessible only to the most educated readers. His De Vulgari Eloquentia, or On Eloquence in the Vernacular, was one of the first scholarly defenses of the vernacular. It is an essay written in Latin and initially meant to consist of 4 books but abandoned in the middle of the second book. Dante attempted to persuade the aristocracy of the importance of the vernacular. It is clear that Dante wanted to ensure that important literary works would be accessible to the most people, not only to those educated ones. The work Divine Comedy of Dante was regarded as the greatest literary work ever produced in the Italian literature, and it is the most prominent poem of the Middle Ages. The Divine Comedy is a narrative poem which comprises sections representing the 3 tiers of the Christian afterlife, which is the purgatory, heaven, and hell. The Divine Comedy of Dante reveals the themes like issues of politics in his time, religious views, human nature, and moral dilemmas of what truly constitutes right from wrong in the eyes of God. Other works of Dante also has a themes of love, death, agony, philosophy, and politics. Next is Petrarch, whose real name is Francisco Petrarca. He was born in the year 1304 and he died in the year 1374. Petrarch was an Italian scholar and poet of early Renaissance Italy. Petrarch is considered one of the famous Italian writers of the Middle Ages. He was also one of the first humanists and he is considered the father of humanism. The Petrarchan sonnet is named after him. He is the one who popularized the form through 366 sonnets that he wrote about his love for a woman named Laura, who never returned his love. In the year 1341, the Roman Senate crowned Petrarch as Poet Laureate, an honorary title that reflected their esteem for his work. The honor of becoming Poet Laureate turned Petrarch into one of the first true celebrities of the Renaissance. Petrarch is best known for his Italian poetry, notably the Rerum Vulgarium Fragmenta, or Fragments of Vernacular Matters, a collection of 366 lyric poems in various genres, also known as canzoniere or songbook. As I have said earlier, this poem is about a woman named Laura whom the speaker loves. The famous work of Petrarch, which is the Canzoniere, reveals the themes of desire, isolation, unrequited love, and vanity of youth. Other works of Petrarch also has the themes of death, eternity, grief, and on philosophical themes such as the moral perfection. Next is Victor Hugo, or Victor Marie Hugo. Victor Hugo was born in the year 1802 and he died in the year 1885 in Paris. Victor Hugo was a French poet and novelist who, after training as a lawyer, embarked on the literary career. Victor Hugo also became one of the most important French Romantic poets, novelists, and dramatists of his time. Victor Hugo did more than just write fictional novels. He was also a passionate supporter of republicanism and served in politics as a deputy in Assemblée Nationale as well as a senator. Victor Hugo's most popular work have to be Les Miserables and Hunchback of Notre Dame. Most of Victor Hugo's poetry reveal the themes of death, nature, and love, as well as the political issues of his day. His Les Miserables is a novel which concerned with the social issues in the 19th century. And lastly is Albert Camus. Albert Camus was born in the year 1913 and died in the year 1960. Albert Camus was a French-Algerian journalist, playwright, novelist, philosophical essayist, and Nobel laureate. He is often described as an existentialist writer, though he himself disavowed this label. He began his literary career as a political journalist and as an actor, director, and playwright in his native Algeria. The Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1957 was awarded to Albert Camus for his important literary production, which with clear-sighted earnestness illuminates the problems of the human conscience in our times. He was honored by his own generation and is still admired today for being a writer of conscience and a champion of imaginative literature as a vehicle of philosophical insight and moral truth. His most famous novels include The Stranger, The Plague, and The Fall. He also wrote an influential philosophical essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. The works of Albert Camus reveals the themes of the irrationality of the universe, the absurdity of the human existence, the meaninglessness of the human life, the importance of the physical world, suicide, decay, and death, and the nature of human revolt, exile, and redemption.
So my topic is under European literature, which is the German authors. First, I'm gonna introduce to you these authors. We have Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. He was born on 1749 and died in 1832. Second is Thomas Mann. He was born on 1875 and died in 1955. And lastly, Michael Ende. He was born on 1929 and died in 1995. So to further know these people, let's discover their biography. So for Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, he was a German playwright, poet, novelist, scientist, statesman, theater director, and critic. His works includes plays, poetry, literature, aesthetic criticism, as well as treatises on botany, anatomy, and color. Then his most famous novels are Faust, Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship, The Sorrows of Young Werther, Elective Affinities, and Prometheus. And lastly, he joins literary movement which are Storm and Drang, Weimar Classicism, and Romanticism in Science. Next is Thomas Mann. So Mann is perhaps one of the most celebrated German writers. He is best known for his work as a novelist and a social critic. His theme of his novels are full of humor and irony. Then he was awarded in 1929 the Nobel Prize for Literature and Goethe Prize in 1949. His notable works are Buddenbrooks, The Magic Mountain, Death in Venice, Joseph and His Brother, Dr. Faustus. Then after achieving literary success, he became quite vocal in his opposition of fascism and the Nazi Party. Lastly, we have Michael Andreas Helmut Ende. So Ende is one of the most popular and well-known German authors of the 20th century, mostly due to the enormous success of his children's fiction. So his theme is children's fiction and fantasy. And his notable works is The Never-Ending Story, Momo, then Jim Button, and Luke the Engine Driver. So his achievements are his works have been translated into more than 40 languages, sold more than 35 million copies, and adapted as motion pictures stage plays, operas, and audiobooks.
So, good morning to all of us. I am Viamachin Sabelio, and today I will be presenting three of the most famous Russian authors, their major works, and their greatest contributions to the Russian literature. So, let's start. First we have is the Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy was born at Yasnaya Polyana, his family estate, on August 28, 1828 in Russia's Tula province, the youngest of four sons. Leo Tolstoy was educated at home by German and French tutors. He was not a particularly exceptional student, but he was good at games. In 1843, he entered Kazan University. Planning on a diplomatic career, he entered the Faculty of Oriental Languages. Finding these studies too demanding, he switched 2 years to later studying law. Tolstoy left the university in 1847 without taking his degree. Tolstoy returned to Yasnaya Polyana, determined to become a model farmer and a father to his serfs. His charity failed because of his foolishness in dealing with the peasants, and because he spent too much time in socializing in Tula and Moscow. During these times, he first began making amazingly honest diary entries, a practice he maintained until his death. These entries provided much material for his fiction, and in a very real sense, the collection is one long autobiography. Tolstoy is a Russian novelist and a moral philosopher. He ranks as one of the world's greatest writers, and his War and Peace has been called the greatest novel ever written. Tolstoy's War and Peace represents a high point in the society or in the history of world literature. But it was also the peak of Tolstoy's personal life. His characters represent almost everyone he had ever met, including all of his relations on both sides of his family. Balls and battles, birth and death, all were described in amazing detail. In this book, the European realistic novel, with its attention to social structures, exact description, and psychological rendering, found its most complete expression. Now let's proceed to the second author, who is Anton Pavlovich Chekhov. Chekhov is considered one of the major literary figures of his time. His plays are still staged worldwide, and his overall body of work influenced important writers of an array of genres, including James Joyce, Ernest Hemingway, Tennessee Williams, and Henry Miller. Chekhov wrote many of his greatest work from the 1890s through the last few years of his life. In his short stories of that period, including Ward Number 6 and The Lady with the Dog, he revealed a profound understanding of human nature and the ways in which ordinary events can carry deeper meaning. In his plays of these years, Chekhov concentrated primarily on mood and characters, showing that they could be more important than the plots. Not much seems to happen to his lonely, often desperate characters, but their inner conflicts take on great significance. Their stories are very specific, painting a picture of pre-revolutionary Russian society, yet timeless. And for the last author, he is Alexander Pushkin. Alexander Pushkin, to one who is not a Russian, is a notable author whose works often live beside the classics at the library. However, to our Russian, Pushkin is more than an author. He is a hero, a national figure, and a man whose life is continually worshipped by Russia. Pushkin, in his brief life, wrote at least 4 novels, 12 verse poems, and numerous plays and short poems. At his death, at least 2 books remained incomplete. One of the books was titled The Negro of Peter the Great, which was a tribute to his great grandfather Ganibal. Years after his death, several people claimed to have unearthed Pushkin's unpublished books. However, due to the writing style of those books and other attributes of Pushkin, led to the theory that the books were counterfeit. Among his greatest works is his first novel, Eugene Onegin. Onegin was the first novel of its kind in Russian literature in terms of its writing style. The novel was written in verse and also featured dialogues, something never attempted previously. Also, the verse was written so that it was meant to be spoken. That is, when a reader reads the novels aloud, the verse is designed so that the words flow out of one's mouth, a rhythm that was aesthetically pleasing to one's ears. Pushkin's legacy and contributions to Russian and global literature is generally uncontested by historians. His works and life influenced future writers to an extent that it is simply astonishing. The popularization of his books truly vaulted Russia into the circles of European society. Until Pushkin's works, there was no Russian novel that earned the recognition of the social and philosophical elites in social centers such as Paris, Vienna, and London. Many Russians of the modern day recognize that fact. So in the end, these 3 famous Russian literature has really contributed a lot to the Russian literature up until now. So that's it for my part. Thank you so much for listening.
Literary theory of the European literature. First, we have structuralism. Structuralism enjoyed popularity in the 1950s and 1960s in both European and American literary theory and criticism. Structuralism as a system of science in which meaning is constructed within a context. Criticism that uses a structuralized approach analyze patterns, narrative operations, and modes of operation to interpret the text and the culture from which it emerged, exploring underlying structures that made the creation of meaning possible. Next is Ferdinand de Saussure, a European person, and he was the most prominent linguist of his time. For example, in this structural theory, when someone says the word three, the sound he or she makes is the signifier and the concept of the tree is the signified. The relationship for the signifier to the signified determines the meaning of the sign.
One of the literary theories that is present in European literature is the postmodernism theory. Postmodernism. Postmodernism broadly refers to a social-cultural and literary theory and a shift in perspective that has manifested in a variety of disciplines, including the social sciences, art, architecture, literature, fashion, communications, and technology. It is generally agreed that the postmodern shift in perception began sometime back in the late 1950s and is probably still continuing. Postmodernism can be associated with the power shifts and dehumanization of the post-Second World War era and the onslaught of consumer capitalism. The very term postmodernism implies a relation to modernism. Modernism was an earlier aesthetic movement which was vague in the early decades of 20th century. It has often been said that postmodernism is at once a continuation of a break away from the modernist stance. Postmodernism shares many of the features of modernism. Both schools reject the rigid boundaries between high and low art. Postmodernism even goes a step further and deliberately mixes low art with high art, the past with the future, or one genre with another. Such mixing of different incongruous elements illustrates postmodernism's use of light-hearted parody, which was also used by modernism. In postmodernism, fragmentation and disorientation is no longer tragic. Postmodernism, on the other hand, celebrates fragmentation. It considers fragmentation and decentredness as the only possible way of existence and does not try to escape from these conditions.
Hi everyone, this is Rachel Maidan, and for my assigned topic, this is all about a literary theory in European literature by Truly Yours. So the content of my topic are the following: gender studies and queer theory, and also a poem on divine revelation. So, gender studies and queer theory in European literature. So, as what you can see on the images that I have put in my presentations, there is a signage of a gender, and there is a flag of the LGBTQ community. So, what is gender theory or gender studies? So, gender theory came to the forefront of the theoretical scene first as feminist theory, but has subsequently come to include the investigation of all gender and sexual categories and identities. So, when we say gender, it focuses or it is all about the LGBTQ or the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. So, why there is a study of a gender? Is it because before there is an equality of the gender? So in this theory, it focuses on the feminist or for the feminine or the female or a woman, or it focuses on the women. So feminist gender theory followed slightly behind the re-emergence of political feminism in the United States and Western Europe during the 1960s. Political feminism of so-called second wave has an emphasis practical concerns with the rights of women in contemporary societies, women's identity, and the representation of women in the media and culture. So before ages, specifically in Europe, like women before have no rights to become a leader. Women before have no rights to do what a man or what men can do. Like they just only like to left behind in the house. So their work only is to babysit their children, to wash the dishes, to clean the house, and etc. So, in other words, they belittle the capability of a woman or the women's before the women before rather they have belittled the capability and without knowing what a woman can do, what woman has the strength, has the power to do. So this is why, and this is the relation between the gender in a literature, how vital the gender is in the society. So let's move forward to the queer theory, which is queer theory, which is the synonymous in the gender study. Why? Because as what I have said earlier, gender is all about the LGBTQ. While the queer theory, it focuses only on the man, woman, and asexuality. So queer theory questions the fixed categories of sexual identity and the cognitive paradigms generated by the normative. So that is what is considered normal sexual ideology. So the literature of the relation between the queer theory in the literature is that the normal kind, or the what we call this one, the importance also of the importance of the normative, like normative sexual ideology. Then, so that is what the gender studies and queer theory in the European literature.
Hey guys, I'm Maria Thea Angelica G. Agbay, and under European literature, I'm going to talk to you about a literary text entitled Federigo's Falcon. So this literary text is specifically under Italian literature, which is also still under European literature. So this is by yours truly, again, Maria Thea Angelica G. Agbay. So before jumping into the story directly, let us first discuss a little bit about where this story came from, which is the Italian literature. So the Italian literature represents rich culture of the country and depicts the future heroic legends that lived in the country for ages. The literary language of Italy was Latin before the 13th century. The chronicles, the historical poems, and the religious poems written in that era were all in Latin. The Sicilian was the earliest poetry ever written in Italian. The main part of the Italy's literature is that it is often depicted in the forms of plays, theaters, and movies, which try to promote the Italian culture in general and literature in particular. Now we have come to the right time of discussing the literary text itself, entitled Federigo's Falcon by Giovanni Boccaccio. Now, assuming that you have read the notes given beforehand, in the next slides, I'm just going to share to you the summary of the story. Squandering his wealth in an attempt to gain the affection of a beautiful woman, Federigo degli Alberighi is left with only a small farm and a magnificent falcon. Federigo loves Monna Giovanna, a young woman of nobility who is already married and has a son. After her wealthy husband dies, Monna and her son travel to their country estate near the farm where Federigo lives. The boy becomes friends with him and covets the prized falcon. Soon the boy is sick. He has one request. "Mother, if you can arrange for me to have Federigo's falcon, I think I would get well quickly." Monna is well aware of Federigo's love for her, but she also realizes how attached the man is to the falcon. Monna makes an unannounced visit to Federigo's farm. Before she declares the purpose of her call, he decides to honor Monna with a meal. Unfortunately, Federigo has nothing to serve her. He catches a glimpse of his falcon on its perch. He breaks its neck and has it roasted on a spit. Monna eats the bird, unaware that it is the animal she has come to request for her son. After dining, she asked Federigo for his falcon. All he can do is weep. He then reveals that he sacrificed the creature to provide a meal worthy of Mona. A few days later, her son dies. After a period of sorrow and resentment, she remarries Federigo. The story develops the theme of love, sacrifice, and the nature of giving by telling the story of a man who gave up his most prized possessions twice for the woman he loves. One of Boccaccio's message in this story is the idea that in love, not all can be impressed by material things and physical appearance, but of service and loyalty towards a person. The following is the reference of where I get my notes on the literary text that I have discussed earlier. Thank you all for participating, and I hope you have learned something. Once again, this is Maria Thea Angelica G. Agbay. Adios!
Good day everyone, I am Marjan Wavo, and for today's video we're going to tackle about the literary text from French literature entitled Les Miserables. So first of all, before we're going to proceed with the literary text, let me give you a brief background about French literature. So French literature is the body of written works in the French language produced by authors from France. So French literature enjoyed enormous international prestige and success in the 19th century. French literature from the first half of the century was dominated by Romanticism, which is associated with such authors as Victor Hugo, Alexandre Dumas, and Alfred de Vigny, and many to mention. Romanticism, also known as a romantic movement, which emphasizes the intense emotions as an authentic source of aesthetic experience, placing new emphasis on such emotion as fear, horror, and terror. And so their influence was felt in theater, poetry, prose, fiction. So the effect of the romantic movement would continue to be felt in the latter half of the century in diverse literary developments such as realism, which generally attempts to represent subject matter truthfully without artificially and avoiding speculative fiction and supernatural elements. Symbolism. So French Romanticism used forms such as the historical novel, romance, and Gothic novel. Les Miserables, a French historical novel, epic novel, and tragedy by Victor Hugo, was first published in 1862. It is considered one of the greatest novels of the 19th century, and in the English-speaking world, the novel is usually referred to by its original French word. However, several alternatives have been used, including the miserable ones, the poor ones, the rich poor, the victims, and the dispossessed. So, Les Miserables has been popularized through numerous adaptations for film, television, and the stage, including a musical. So the novel is divided into 5 volumes, each volume divided into several books and subdivided into chapters for a total of 48 books and 365 chapters. Volume 1, entitled Fantine. In Paris, a grisette named Fantine was very much in love with Felix Salamès. His friends and Fantine's friends are being paired, so the men abandon the women, treating the relationships as youthful amusements. And then Fantine becomes pregnant of Ptolemy's daughter named Cosette. After he abandons her, she is forced to look after the child on her own. By the time Cosette is approximately 3, Fantine arrives at Montfermeil and meets the Thénardiers, who are owners of an inn. She asks them to take care of Cosette, and they agree to do so as long as she sends them money to provide for her. And then Fantine is eventually forced by circumstances to become a prostitute, selling her hair and front teeth, losing her beauty and health. So the money she earns is sent to support her daughter. Fantine is unaware that they are abusing her daughter and using her as forced labor for their inn, and continues to try to meet their growing, extortionate, and fictitious demands. She is later fired from her job at Jean Valjean's factory. because of the discovery of her daughter who was born out of wedlock. So Fantine is slowly dying from a specific disease, which Javert arrests Fantine and she begs to be released. Valjean intervenes and orders Javert to release her, promises Fantine that he will bring Cosette to her. So he takes her to a hospital, and then Javert reveals to her Valjean's real identity. Weakened by the severity of her illness, she falls back in shock and dies. In Volume 2, entitled Cosette, while Fantine is in the hospital, Jean Valjean vows to retrieve Cosette for her. Although she dies before seeing her daughter, Valjean becomes determined to look after the young girl. So Valjean arrives at Montfermeil on Christmas Eve, which he finds Cosette fetching a pail of water and accompanies her back to their inn, where he witnessed her mistreatment by the Thénardiers. Valjean leaves the inn and returns with an expensive new doll which he offers to Cosette. At first reluctant, Cosette joyfully accepts it, which infuriates Thénardiers. Eponine and Azelma become jealous. So the next morning, Valjean informs the Thénardiers that he has come to take Cosette with him, and Madame Thénardier immediately agrees but pretends affection for Cosette and acts reluctant. Thénardier, hoping to swindle more out of Valjean, runs after them and tells Valjean he wants Cosette back. So he informs Valjean that he cannot release Cosette without a note from the child's mother. Then Valjean hands Fantine's letter authorizing the bearer to take Cosette. Then Valjean and Cosette leave. They flee to Paris, which Valjean rents new lodgings in Gorbeau house, where he and Cosette live happily. However, Javert discovers Valjean's lodgings there a few months later. So Valjean takes Cosette and they try to escape from Javert. They soon find shelter on the Petit Picpus convent with the help of Fauchelevent, the man whom Valjean once rescued from being crushed under a cart and who has become the convent's gardener. Valjean also becomes a gardener and Cosette becomes a student at the convent school. Volume 3, entitled Marius. Marius Pontmercy has become alienated from his family because of his Bonapartist views. After the death of his father, Marius discovers a note from him instructing his son to provide help to a sergeant named Thénardier, who saved his life at Waterloo. In reality, Thénardier was looting corpses and only saved Pontmercy's life by accident. So Marius falls in love with a now grown and beautiful Cosette. So the Thénardiers have also moved to Paris and now live in poverty after losing their inn. They live under the surname Jondrette at Gorbeau house. So Marius lives there as well, next door to the Thénardiers. Marius observes the Jondrettes in their apartment through a crack in the wall. So Eponine comes in and announces that a philanthropist and his daughters are arriving to visit them. In order to look poorer, the philanthropist and his daughter enter, which is actually Valjean and Cosette. So Valjean promises then he will return with rent money for them. So the Thénardiers have also recognized Valjean and Cosette and vow their revenge. Marius overhears Thénardier's plans and goes to Javert to report the crime. When Valjean returns with rent money, Thénardier with patron Minette ambushes him and he reveals his real identity to Valjean. Marius recognizes Thénardier as the man who saved his father's life at Waterloo and is caught in a dilemma. So he tries to find a way to save Valjean while not betraying Thénardier. So that Valjean manages to free himself, Thénardier decides to kill Valjean. Thénardier and the patron Minette try to escape only to be stopped by Javert. He arrests all the Thénardiers and patron Minette. Volume 4, which entitled Saint Denis. So Eponine, released from prison, finds Marius and tells him that she found Cosette's address, leads him to Valjean's and Cosette's house. Marius watches the house for a few days and then he and Cosette then finally met and declare their love for one another. Thénardier, Patron-Minette, and Bourgoin manages to escape from prison with the aid of Gavroche. One night, the six men attempt to raid Valjean's and Cosette's house. However, Eponine, who has been sitting by the gates of the house, threatens to scream and awaken the whole neighbor. Cosette informs Marius that she and Valjean will be leaving for England in a week's time, which greatly troubles the pair the next day. So the Valjean, feeling troubled about seeing Thénardier in the neighborhood several times. So the following day, the students revolt and erect barricades in the narrow streets of Paris. Gavroche spots Javert and informs Enjolras that Javert is a spy. When Marius arrives at the barricade, the revolution has already started. Then he stops down to pick up a powder keg. A soldier comes up to shoot Marius. Marius decides to go to the smaller barricade, which he finds empty. The man who took the fatal shot for Mezo was Eponine, dressed in men's clothes. As she lies dying on his knees, she confesses Marius fulfills her request. He learns Cosette's whereabouts and he writes a farewell letter to her. So Valjean, learning that Cosette's lover is fighting, is at first relieved, but an hour later he puts on a National Guard uniform, arms himself with a gun and ammunition, and leaves his home. Volume 5 entitled Jean Valjean. So Valjean arrives at the barricade and immediately saves a man's life. Valjean volunteers to execute Javert himself and Enjolras grants permission. So Valjean takes Javert out of sight and then shoots into the air while letting him go. So Marius mistakenly believes that Valjean has killed Javert. As the barricade falls, Valjean carries off the injured and unconscious Marius. All the other students are killed. Valjean escapes through the sewers carrying Marius' body. Thénardier emerges from the darkness. Then Valjean recognizes Thénardier, but the Thénardier does not recognize Valjean. So thinking Valjean a murderer hugging his victim's corpse, Thénardier offers to open the gate for money. Thénardier takes the 30 francs he finds, and then opens the gate and allows Valjean to leave. Upon exiting, Valjean encounters Javert and requests time to return Marius to his family before surrendering to him. So Valjean asks to be allowed a brief visit to his own home, and Javert agrees. Javert tells Valjean he will wait for him in the street, but when Valjean scans the street from the landing window, he finds Javert has gone. So Javert commits suicide by throwing himself into the Seine. So Marius slowly recovers from his injury, and as he and Cosette make wedding preparations, so Valjean confesses to Marius that he is an ex-convict, which Marius is horrified. So Valjean assents to Marius' judgment and his separation from Cosette. Valjean loses the will to live and retires to his bed. After that, they rush to Valjean's house, which they arrive to find Valjean near death and reconcile with him. So Valjean tells Cosette her mother's story and name. He dies content. It is buried beneath a blank slab in Père Lachaise cemetery. And that's all for my part. Thank you for listening.
The German literature. Literature of the German-speaking people in Europe, primarily the Germans, Austrian, and Swiss. The German language, like its literature, has strong regional characteristics. German literature is rich in beautifully crafted stories, especially from the eras of Sturm und Drang, Romanticism, and Realism. Certain German books are an excellent introduction not only to German literature, but to German culture and the history of the Germany too. Literary text and the title Faust by Johann Wolfgang. Heinrich Faust, a learned scholar, feels that none of his many achievements has provided him with a satisfaction or a sense of fulfillment. He yearns to gain knowledge of absolute truth and the meaning of existence. Faust turns to magic in the hope of finding a solution and finally makes a pact with the devil. He agrees to sell his soul if the devil can give him one moment of experience, which is so rewarding that his sense of alienation disappears, and he calls upon that moment to stay as it is forever. In part 1 of the poem, Faust attempts, with the devil's help, to find happiness through emotional involvement. His tragic love affair with Gretchen and her death, but Faust is most chastened by this experience. In part 2, he tries to satisfy his craving through temporal accomplishment and exposure to all that the world can offer in terms of ideas and externalized gratification. He attains an important position at the imperial court, learns much from the figures of classical antiquity, woos Helen of Troy, who wins great victories, and is renowned from his public work, but none of these things give him lasting peace of mind. Faust is bitter and disillusioned.
he is finally admitted to heaven by God's grace in reward for his endless striving after knowledge of goodness and truth, and his courageous resolution to believe in the existence of something higher than himself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Remeline D. Binolero, and today I'm going to talk to you about my topic in literary text entitled After the Ball by Leo Tolstoy. This story is classified as Russian literature, but it is also classified as European literature. So before I get into the main plot of the literary text, let's talk about Russian literature for a minute, where this story came from. Russian literature is a major part of the country's culture and education throughout the world. Some of the world's most famous poets and novelists were Russian. These writers include Alexander Pushkin, Leo Tolstoy, and Fyodor Dostoevsky. Their poems and books were about classic issues of freedom, morality, love, and conflict. These works are still popular in Russia, Europe, and America. So before I will read to you the literary text entitled After the Ball by Leo Tolstoy, assuming that you have already read the notes provided beforehand. So in my next slide, I will just only read to you the summary of the story. This happened in the 40s, when Ivan Vasilievich was still a student at the university. He was young and rich, and very much in love with a beautiful girl named Varya. Her father was a colonel, the military head of a Nicholas bearing named Peter Vladislavovich, a stately, tall old man. His story begins with a description of the ball in the house of the provincial leader. Happy Ivan enjoys socializing with his girlfriend. Everything seems to him wonderful and kind host, beautiful outfits, a dazzling hall, merry music. Throughout the evening, the hero does not take his eyes off his beloved. He watches with delight the dancing colonel and his daughter. Touched by his self-made boots, thinking that his father, for the sake of Varenka, saved himself and goes to the victims. A young man is ready to love the whole world. I was not only happy and happy. I was happy, I was blessed, I was kind, I was not I, but some unearthly creature who knows no evil and is incapable of one good. The narrator recalls. Inspired by impressions, the narrator returning home remains in a state of bliss. He goes out into the street, early morning, a walking city, where passers-by. The surroundings seem nice and significant. This part of the story is imbued with a feeling of kindness and light. Brilliant eyes, joyful smiles, white and pink colors surround the young lover. The mood changes dramatically in the next part of the narrative. Ivan Vasilievich, in the scattered morning fog, saw a picture that struck his imagination. Between the soldiers with sticks in their hands, they drove the Tatar. His co-workers badly beat him on orders from his superiors, punishing him for escape. His back turned into something motley, wet, red, and natural. The young man heard the words of the poor fellow. He did not speak, but sobbed, "Brothers, be merciful. Brothers, pardon me." But the punishment continued. In the man who was in charge of torture, Ivan Vasilievich unexpectedly recognized the father of his beloved Varenka. The officer, without removing his gloves, beat one of the soldiers who decided to regret with an unhappy man. Noticing Ivan Vasilievich, Pyotr Vladislavovich pretended that they were not acquainted and continued to monitor the execution. The main character felt horror and shame. On his way home, he tried to find an excuse for the actions of the colonel. But before him again and again, a terrible picture arose, and in his ears sounded unpleasant sharp music. He was scary, scared, and sad. This event radically changed the life of a young man. He stopped meeting with Varenka. Love has waned. For a long time, I tried to understand what I saw. I thought that he did not understand something important in this life. But no matter how hard I tried, and then I could not recognize it. Therefore, he did not want to be an officer. He did not become an official. Worth outlook and moral principles did not allow him to serve the state with such cruel and unfair laws. So, based on the story, this work shows that the life and customs of the noble society of that time. So, the author describes the events on behalf of the protagonist, who tells two cases from his own life that happened to him during the student period. So, the main idea here is that the decisive moment in the fate of any person is not the environment, but the circumstances. For you to be able to understand more about the literary text of After the Ball, I have posted here the references of the story that I read to you earlier. Presentation